and he begins to feel depressed if he hasn't had his McDonald's fix. And he begins to think that there is an addictive quality to it, and he's quite right, according to this research. Now, if you're trying to give up junk foods, it may have a stronger hold on you because these processed foods trigger the same kind of symptoms, physical and psychological, that you get from trying to give up smoking, the cravings and anxiety that you get if you've ever had to do that. You can get mood swings and headaches and poor sleep. And this is what Mr. Spurlock was going through during that film, Super Size Me, as he's documenting his McDonald's experience. Now, researchers from the University of Michigan have found that these withdrawal symptoms were most intense between days 2 and days 5 after going cold turkey on things like chocolate and fries and other junk food. Earlier studies in animals and humans have shown very similar addictive-like consumption of highly processed foods. These researchers looked at 200 people who had succeeded in quitting junk foods and got them to respond to a questionnaire about withdrawal symptoms they experienced. It didn't measure the intensity of the symptoms, but it does depend on the participants' recall of events. So there needs to be more research on it, but it's just another indication that junk foods can really be addictive. Apparently, in addition to having influence on weight gain, they are also linked to depression. And that may have something to do with the mood swings that withdrawal symptoms cause. There was a British study of 3,500 middle-aged men and women, and they found that after 5 years, these participants who had diets that were high in processed meat, chocolate, sweets, desserts, fried food, refined cereals, and high-fat dairy products, they were 58% more likely to be depressed than those whose diets were composed mainly of fruit, vegetables, and fish. Then there was a Spanish research project that looked at the mental health attributes of more than 12,000 men and women for 6 years, and they reported that at the outset, while none had anything about depression in their diagnoses, after the study ended, 657 of them were found to be depressed. The researchers reported that the study subjects with an elevated consumption of trans fats, that's the fat that's found in these fast foods and cookies and all of those things, they had up to a 48% increase in the risk of depression compared to participants who didn't eat those foods. So it can also, besides causing you to be addicted, it can also cause you to be depressed. Interesting stuff. And that brings us to the debate I was telling you about regarding cheese. Now, there have been articles like one that says cheese is like crack and as addictive as cocaine. And one of the things that was attributed to this addiction was the protein casomorphins that is found in cheese, and they were saying that it has an opioid type effect. Now, there's been more research on this, and even though cheese has a high level of this, it doesn't necessarily have the same effect, and it doesn't have the same effect as real morphine. But it does have an addictive quality due to the high degrees of fat and sugar. Those are the things that really are the most addictive. Um, so the foods that are high in carbohydrates, salt, and fat, those are the ones that are most addictive. And in a recent study where researchers at the University of Michigan again looked at different types of foods, and they studied 120 undergraduates and another 384 participants to take a look at what kind of foods were more likely to cause cravings or binges. And they included junk foods like cookies, cakes, and pizza, as well as vegetables like broccoli and cucumber. For each option, they had to make a choice: cookies or apples, cheeseburgers or water, things like that. So the most highly ranked foods that people were most likely to have difficulty with, addictive-wise, were those with the highly processed sugar and fat, like chips, cake, and pizza. Low carbohydrate foods like nuts and eggs, or low fat foods such as bananas and strawberries, were always ranked very low. And in contrast, when you look at highly processed foods like chocolate and pizza, those are the ones people struggle with. So cheese now in this study cheese was not even in the top 10 of the foods that these participants said they found problematic. It came in at about 16 out of 35. And chocolate, French fries, and pizza were way higher. They were at like 3 and 4. And buttered popcorn and gummy candy, they were all much, much higher than cheese. And when the second group was asked to rank foods on a scale of 1 to 7, cheese did a little better, coming in at number 10. But it doesn't even compare to the highly processed foods. So what happens is, because this cheese has an effect on the area of the brain that involves reward circuitry, which is the same kind of area of the brain that drugs hit. So you will get a rush, and the brain says, "Oh boy, that's good. Let's do it again." But while cheese does give you those good feelings, when it comes to addictive properties, it doesn't compare to drugs at all. So the scientists want you to know that no, cheese is not like a drug, though it does have some similarity in its effects on the reward system of the brain. And the casomorphines will activate your opioid system, but it doesn't make it addictive. So just to know that, but I'm sure that doesn't make much difference to you if you like cheese a lot, like I do. But it's good information to know. All right, so oh my goodness, we are running late on our segment today, so let's talk about our hero of consciousness for this episode. Our hero is a researcher by the name of Rick Doblin. And you can read more about him in the book I've been talking about so much by Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind: What the New Science of Psychedelics Teaches Us About Consciousness, Dying, Addiction, Depression, and Transcendence. He features largely in this book, and he founded the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, or MAPS. He founded that back in the 1980s This was at a time when all of the psychedelic studies were not able were basically illegal because the drugs were illegal, and there wasn't much hope of restarting the research back then. But he carried on. He began to experiment in college, as many people have, with psychedelics around 1987, and after experimenting with LSD as an undergrad, he then moved on to the MDMA, also known as ecstasy. And he decided his calling in life was to become a therapist, a psychedelic therapist. But unfortunately, the drugs that he wanted to use to achieve that goal were made illegal. In 1985, ecstasy was made illegal by the Food and Drug Administration. But then he went, determined as he was, to Harvard's Kennedy School, got a doctorate in public policy, and then he began to really learn the ropes of how to get official acceptance from the FDA for drug approval. And then he began to plot the path to official acceptance of psilocybin, which is one of the psychedelics that gets studied very frequently, and also ecstasy as well. And these processes of getting drug approval are what has laid the groundwork for many studies. So he sort of laid out the path or the map for people to get around the drug laws so that they could be used in studies. He believes that winning FDA approval for the medical use of psychedelics is a means to a more ambitious and more controversial end: the incorporation of psychedelics into American society and culture, not just medicine. Which is exactly what's been happening with, if you've been following what's been happening with the decriminalization of marijuana. And now many states have made it legal not just for medical use, but for general use as well. Now many don't particularly get on board with that agenda, but Rick Doblin is not one of them. He's very adamant about this and very open about what he wants to achieve. And in the past several years, he's succeeded in getting important research approved and funded, particularly in the use of ecstasy or MDMA through his organization MAPS. They've sponsored several clinical trials that have demonstrated that MDMA's value in treating post-traumatic stress disorder is quite high. But beyond helping those suffering with PTSD, his group MAPS is also sponsoring a clinical study at UCLA involving autistic adults. What he believes fervently is that psychedelics can improve humankind by disclosing a spiritual dimension of consciousness that we all share, regardless of our religious beliefs or lack thereof. Mysticism, he likes to say, is the antidote to fundamentalism. That is awesome. I'm going to read that again because it's really important. Doblin believes fervently in the power of psychedelics to improve humankind by disclosing a spiritual dimension of consciousness we all share, regardless of our religious beliefs